Have you ever looked around at your life? Maybe you've uh, achieved some big goals. You have people who care about you, and yet underneath it all, there's this quiet hum of, well, emptiness.
Mhm.
A feeling like a vital piece of yourself is missing, but you can't quite, grasp what it is.
Yeah.
It's a strange kind of disconnect, like you're living a life that looks right on the surface but feels, I don't know, profoundly off internally.
That feeling of inner emptiness, despite outward success, is something many people grapple with, yeah. And often, as we'll explore today, the origins lie in our earliest relationships, our most formative ones.
And that's precisely what we're diving deep into today. We're going to explore the intricate and often really subtle ways in which having a narcissistic mother can impact a daughter's life, leading to this exact sense of hollowness.
The subtle part is key.
Our guide through this complex terrain is psychoanalyst Cinzia Capobianco.
Yeah.
Her insights were recently published in Die Zeit and translated by WorldCrunch.
And our mission here is really to illuminate the less obvious but deeply significant ways this mother-daughter dynamic can shape a daughter's sense of self, her well-being.
Right.
We want to provide not just understanding, but also hopefully some glimmers of hope for healing.
This is a topic that we know can touch many of you deeply, and we want to assure you that we're approaching this with care and a commitment to clarity.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's start with that core feeling, that emptiness. What's the connection between having a narcissistic mother and this profound lack of inner fulfillment?
Well, what's particularly striking, as Capobianco points out, is that these women often present with, depressive symptoms, low motivation, fatigue, a general lack of joy.
Okay.
But without a clear trigger or like an obvious external cause, their lives to an outsider might look perfectly fine.
Right, might have careers, families.
Exactly, social connections. Yet, as that patient note shared in the interview illustrates so poignantly, there's this internal void.
Yeah, that note, it reads, insidious, increasingly severe depressive symptoms with a severe loss of motivation. Mrs. S. often thinks of her mother as if she were always beside her, constantly criticizing her.
Wow.
Occasionally, and without any apparent trigger, she falls into states where she feels completely empty. It is as if someone had turned off the lights. It's just such a powerful and unsettling image.
It really is, and it speaks to a core mechanism at play here.
Huh?
The development of what psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott called the false self.
The false self. Okay.
Yeah. Imagine a child constantly sensing that their true feelings, their desires, they're not really accepted or valued by their main caregiver, in this case, the mother. So to gain approval, to get connection, the child unconsciously starts building a persona, right? A way of being that mirrors what the mother seems to want or expect.
Oh, okay.
And over time, this false self can become so dominant that the daughter just loses touch with her authentic self, her own genuine needs, her desires, often without even being consciously aware of it.
So it's like living a role that someone else wrote for you, and you do it for so long, you actually forget who you are when the script isn't there.
That's a really insightful way to put it, yeah. And Capobianco emphasizes that narcissistic mothers often subtly but consistently project their own stuff, their aspirations, their fears, their values onto their children. They're essentially guiding their choices and subtly dismissing anything that deviates from that. This constant, often unconscious direction makes it incredibly difficult for the daughter to develop a strong, independent sense of self.
It isn't always overt control then.
Not always, no. Often it's this pervasive undercurrent that just subtly invalidates the daughter's own inner world.
It sounds a lot like a very early form of what we now recognize as gaslighting in adult relationships. That constant undermining of your own reality and perceptions.
Exactly. Capobianco draws that parallel directly, and it really highlights why the impact is so profound. This isn't something that happens later in life. It starts when the child's sense of self is just forming.
Right at the beginning.
Yeah. And the tragedy is the daughter often grows up internalizing this external validation, thinking it's her own truth, which makes it incredibly challenging to recognize and untangle these patterns later on, even in other relationships.
Wow. Okay, this idea of the false self, built on this subtle invalidation, it really does shed light on that feeling of emptiness. So let's dig into the roots of this. Where does this narcissistic mothering actually stem from? What's the underlying dynamic?
Well, from a psychoanalytic perspective, narcissistic personality traits often come about as a defense mechanism. It's against these deep-seated unconscious insecurities and unmet needs from the mother's own early life.
Oh.
Think of it as a way to compensate for a a pretty fragile sense of self.
So it's not necessarily about intentionally harming the child, or maybe it is sometimes.
Well, not usually consciously, no, although the impact is definitely harmful. A core unmet need for many individuals with narcissistic traits is the experience of unconditional love in their own childhood.
Right, that foundational need.
Exactly. Every child needs to feel loved and accepted for who they are, not just for what they do or achieve. When this unconditional love is missing, it can lead to developing a grandiose self.
Grandiose.
Yeah, like an inflated sense of self-importance and achievement. It's a way to try and regulate their self-esteem, basically.
It's like an overcompensation then.
Precisely. And this underlying insecurity often makes it difficult for them to form genuine emotional connections with others. They might struggle with empathy, have a strong need to control their environment, the people around them.
To feel secure.
Yeah, as a way to feel secure. Interestingly, as Capobianco notes, this drive for external validation can sometimes lead to significant outward success, in careers, social standing.
They can look very accomplished.
They can. But this external success often masks a deep vulnerability and actually a higher risk of experiencing crises, addiction, or even suicidal thoughts when their sense of control gets threatened.
So behind that facade of confidence, there's often a really fragile inner world. And how does this manifest specifically in the way they mother their daughters?
Well, the key characteristic of a narcissistic mother is her inability to truly see her child as a separate individual, with her own needs, her own desires.
Not separate.
Not separate, no. Instead, the child, particularly the daughter, is often seen as an extension of herself, a reflection of her own worth.
Oh, wow.
Capobianco shares this observation that one patient described her mother as highly focused on appearances and achievements, almost as if the daughter's successes were a direct reflection of the mother's own value.
Yikes.
Yeah. So in these dynamics, the child's primary role often becomes fulfilling the mother's unmet needs and bolstering her fragile self-esteem. The child becomes, in essence, a project.
A project.
Aimed at validating the mother.
That's a really powerful and, frankly, quite unsettling way to think about it.
Yeah.
The child as a project. So what's the direct impact on the daughter growing up in that kind of environment?
Well, if the daughter's own personality, her natural inclinations, her interests, if they don't align with the mother's expectations for this project, the daughter can experience subtle or sometimes even overt rejection. Their inherent worth becomes conditional. They're valued mostly when they reflect well on the mother or fulfill her needs.
Oh, that's rough.
It creates this profound internal conflict and often leads to that very confusion we talked about earlier. As Capobianco highlights, daughters in this situation often grapple with thoughts like, nothing objectively bad happened to me. My mother provided for me, so why do I feel this persistent emptiness?
Because the wounds are invisible.
Exactly. They're emotional, not physical. It's the constant subtle message that who you are isn't enough. Only who you are in relation to the mother matters.
Right. And what happens when the daughter tries to become her own person?
Well, a daughter who starts to assert her independence, develop her own opinions, make her own choices, she can be perceived as a threat to the narcissistic mother's need for control and validation. Yeah. So the mother might then use subtle tactics, criticism, emotional manipulation, even playing the victim.
Ooh, the guilt trip.
Totally. To maintain control and pull the daughter back into alignment with her expectations. Over time, the daughter learns to just suppress her own desires, her own needs, to maintain some kind of connection with her mother.
And that leads straight back to that deep sense of emptiness.
Directly. And a disconnect from her authentic self. Capobianco also notes, interestingly, that daughters can sometimes face unique challenges compared to sons in this dynamic.
How so?
Well, the mother often sees the daughter as a closer reflection of herself, like a mini-me kind of thing, which can lead to more intense pressure to conform to the mother's ideal. Or sometimes the opposite, more intense rivalry if the daughter threatens the mother's sense of self in some way. The father or other supportive figures, though, can sometimes play a really positive role in counterbalancing that influence.
Okay, so having another stable adult can help.
It can help facilitate separation, yeah. But puberty can be especially tough. If you don't have a solid sense of self, trying to distance yourself brings up immense guilt, especially if the mother reinforces that dependence, saying things like, "You are all I have," makes emotional escape really difficult.
It sounds like a really complex, tangled web of dynamics. So knowing all of this, what does the path to healing look like for someone who's experienced this? Is it possible?
Capobianco offers a hopeful perspective here, definitely. She points out that a significant turning point for many women happens when they become mothers themselves.
Interesting. Why then?
Well, that experience can trigger this deep desire to break the cycle, to not repeat the patterns they experienced.
Right, they don't want to do that to their own kids.
Exactly. A crucial aspect of healing involves learning to give themselves what they never received, unconditional self-compassion, acceptance. It also means recognizing and challenging those ingrained false self-beliefs and starting to explore and nurture their true desires and needs.
Finding out who they really are.
Yes. And this often requires a process of differentiation, of emotionally separating from the mother's influence and establishing a strong, independent identity.
So it's almost like learning to reparent yourself in a way.
In a sense, yes, absolutely. It involves grieving the lack of the mothering they needed and learning to provide that nurturing and validation for
That
themselves.
sounds hard.
It is hard. Capobianca also touches on the importance of setting healthy boundaries in their relationship with their mother, which can be incredibly challenging but ultimately essential for protecting their own well-being.
Boundaries are key.
And therapy can be just invaluable in this process, providing a safe space to explore these really complex emotions, identify those ingrained patterns, and develop healthier ways of coping. As psychoanalyst Herbert Rosenfeld observed, narcissistic defenses can be deeply entrenched, like a mafia game protecting the fragile self. But understanding the origins of the pain, as Capobianco emphasizes, is the critical first step.
But it's not just intellectual understanding, right?
No, not at all. It's about allowing yourself to actually feel the pain and the emptiness that's been suppressed, maybe for decades. In order to begin filling that void with self-love and acceptance, it's like Freud's concept of mourning. You have to grieve what was lost or what you never had.
That makes sense. Grieving the love you didn't get.
And learning to give it to yourself. It's often a long and challenging journey, definitely. There can be setbacks, pain can come in waves. But ultimately, as Capobianco reassures us, healing and a greater sense of inner peace are possible. The pain does soften over time.
This has been a truly illuminating deep dive into a really complex and often painful dynamic. Just to recap some key insights from our discussion drawing on Cynthia Capobianco's work.
Yeah.
Daughters of narcissistic mothers often experience that deep inner emptiness, right? Rooted in developing a false self to get conditional love.
Conditional acceptance.
Which leads to feeling disconnected from their true selves and can cause difficulties in forming healthy relationships later on.
Repeating those patterns, often unconsciously, or avoiding relationships altogether.
Right. But importantly, understanding these patterns, allowing yourself to grieve the past, these are crucial steps on the path toward healing and reclaiming an authentic sense of self.
And as we've discussed, seeking professional support, therapy, can provide invaluable guidance and tools for navigating this journey of self-discovery and healing. It's not something you have to do alone.
Absolutely. And if you found this deep dive insightful and helpful, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the deep dive wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, we always appreciate your support.
We really do. And let us know your suggestions for future topics in the comments below. Also, if you're interested in exploring this topic further and supporting the show, we've compiled a list of recommended books and resources related to narcissistic parenting and healing in the show notes.
As good resources there.
Yeah. Just a heads up, some of these may contain affiliate links, which just means we might earn a small commission if you make a purchase, but at no extra cost to you.
Helps keep the lights on.
Exactly. Finally, maybe something to think about. What's one small act of self-compassion you can offer yourself today? Just one small thing.
Good question to ponder.
This is really just the beginning of understanding these intricate human dynamics. Join us next time as we delve into another fascinating aspect of the human experience. Stay tuned.